"No man has touched me in months," the giant Apache woman said, shy farmer. It was a quiet, peaceful morning on the outskirts of town. The sun was just beginning to rise, casting a warm orange glow across the fields. The breeze rustled the tall grass, and the air smelled of fresh earth and wild flowers. A small house sat on the edge of the land, surrounded by sprawling fields of crops. This was where the shy farmer lived, a man who preferred the solitude of the land over the company of people. He had always been more comfortable in the company of animals, or with his hands in the soil, than he had ever been around other people. The townsfolk often whispered about him, wondering why he kept to himself. Some even called him odd, but he didn't mind. He liked it that way. He had been this way for as long as he could remember, quiet, introverted, and unsure of how to interact with the world beyond his farm. The shy farmer didn't mind the whispers or the curious stares. He found peace in his work, and it was enough for him. One morning as he was working the fields, he heard the sound of wheels creaking in the distance. At first he ignored it, thinking it was just the usual sounds of nature, the wind, birds, or maybe a passing traveler. But the creaking continued, growing louder, and eventually the source of the noise came into view. It was a wagon, slowly making its way down the road toward his farm. The farmer paused, wiping his brow with his sleeve. He wasn't expecting anyone, and he certainly wasn't used to visitors. As the wagon grew closer, he could see the figure of a woman sitting atop it. She was large even by the standards of the men in town, and her presence was commanding. She looked like she belonged to the land, like she had the strength of the earth itself. Her hair was dark, and her skin had the warm golden tone of someone who had spent years under the sun. But there was something about her eyes that revealed a deep loneliness. The wagon came to a stop near the edge of the farmer's land. The wagon came to a stop near the edge of the farmer's land. He stood there for a moment, unsure of what to do. He had never spoken to this woman before. In fact, he had never spoken to anyone like her. The townspeople had told stories about her, the giant Apache woman who had lived alone on the outskirts of town for years. Some said she was fierce and unapproachable. Others claimed she was simply misunderstood. But one thing was certain. She had been living alone for months, keeping to herself, just like he did. The woman glanced at him, noticing him standing there. Her gaze was sharp, as though she had been waiting for him to take notice of her. Back. After a brief moment, she spoke. "Got a problem," she said, her voice low and steady, like a distant rumble of thunder. "Wagon broke! Can you help?" The farmer blinked, caught off guard by her directness. He wasn't used to being asked for help, especially not by someone like her. But he also knew what it felt like to be alone, to struggle with things on his own. So, without much thought, he nodded and walked toward her. "I can take a look," he said, his voice quieter than he intended. He wasn't one for conversation, and talking to someone like her made him nervous. Still, there was something about her that made him want to help. Brah. She didn't seem like someone who needed help, but maybe she did. As he approached the wagon, he could see the issue right away. A wheel had come loose from the axle, and it looked like it would take some time to fix. The woman didn't speak again, but she watched him closely as he knelt down and began to inspect the damage. He was used to fixing things. He spent most of his time working with tools, mending fences, and repairing the machinery around the farm. It felt natural to him, even if it was a bit intimidating to be around someone like her.
The woman didn't offer to help. She just stood there, her arms crossed, her eyes trained on the farmer as he worked.
For a moment the farmer felt a bit self-conscious under her gaze, but he pushed it aside, focusing on the task at hand. As he worked, the silence between them grew. The only sounds were the creaking of the wagon, and the soft rustle of the wind through the grass. Breast. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the farmer managed to fix the wheel. He wiped his hands on his pants and stood up, looking at the woman. G didn't smile, but there was a faint look of approval in her eyes. "Good work," she said, her voice still steady but softer now, almost like a compliment. The farmer simply nodded. He wasn't used to compliments, and certainly not from someone like her. He didn't know what to say. He wasn't sure what was expected of him, so he stood there awkwardly, unsure of how to continue. "Bast. Thank you," she added, her voice still low but a bit warmer this time. "I don't get many visitors. Don't really need them." The farmer looked at her, realizing that he had just helped someone who was as lonely as he was. It felt strange, but in a way it was comforting. He understood what it was like to live alone, to keep to yourself and avoid the world. But maybe, just maybe, helping someone else could be the start of something different. "Well," the woman continued, glancing back at her wagon, "I'd better be on my way. Got a lot to do." The farmer felt a sudden urge to say something more, to keep the conversation going. But what could he say? He wasn't good at talking, especially not with someone as intimidating as her. "You can stay," the farmer blurted out before he even realized he had spoken. He immediately felt embarrassed and regretted the words as soon as they left his mouth. She looked at him for a moment, her expression unreadable. For a moment he thought she might decline and leave, but instead, she nodded. "Ah."
"I'll stay for a bit," she said simply. "You got anything to eat?"
He had never expected to hear those words from her. He was used to being alone, cooking only for himself. But now he found himself inviting her to share a meal. It was a small thing, but it felt like a step forward, a step towards something he had never experienced before. Human connection. "Sure," the farmer replied. "I've got bread and beans." Breath. "Not much, but it'll do." "Sounds good enough," she said with a small nod, stepping off the wagon and following him to the house. The quiet, reserved farmer and the giant Apache woman, both solitary figures in their own right, found themselves sitting together at the farmer's simple table. As they ate, the silence between them didn't feel awkward anymore. It was just the two of them, sharing a moment of peace in a world that often felt too loud, too busy. And as the evening wore on, something shifted between them. A bond, fragile and unspoken, began to form. Neither of them had expected it, but in this quiet, unexpected moment, they found something that both had been missing: companionship. The farmer looked at her from across the table. She met his gaze, her eyes soft but distant, as if she were contemplating something deep. Inspiration. She hadn't said much, but there was something about her that made him feel at ease. She wasn't like anyone he had ever met, and maybe, just maybe, she didn't mind his quiet nature. And for the first time in a long time, the farmer allowed himself to hope that this connection might turn into something more. Something that could change the lonely paths they both walked alone. Over the next few weeks, the farmer and the Apache woman continued to meet, though their encounters became less about necessity and more about something they had both started to crave: company.
At first, the visits were brief and practical.
The Apache woman, who had told him that she was used to doing everything herself, would come to the farmer's land with small problems that needed fixing, from a broken fence to a loose wagon wheel. She was a strong woman, capable of fixing just about anything. But there was a quiet vulnerability in the way she sometimes looked at him, as if she longed for something more than her solitary existence. For the farmer, the visits were a welcome change to the quiet life he had always known. He was used to the sounds of nature, the rustling of the wind, the songs of birds, and the hum of insects, but nothing had ever been as comforting as the presence of another person. They rarely spoke about anything too personal. Their conversations would circle around simple things, how the weather was holding up, the condition of the crops, or what little improvements needed to be made on their respective homesteads. But even these small exchanges began to form a bridge between them, a bridge neither of them had expected to build. One day, the Apache woman came to him with a basket of herbs she had gathered from the wilds around her home. The air was crisp and cool that afternoon, the sky a pale blue, and she had a serious look on her face. "Thought you might need these," she said as she handed him the basket. It was filled with wild mint, lavender, and some plants he didn't recognize. "They'll help with your backaches. Been seeing you bend over a lot lately. Thought you could use a little help." The farmer was taken aback. He hadn't realized she'd been paying such close attention to him. He had always been careful to hide his pains, pretending he didn't need anyone's help. But now, in this small moment, he felt both surprised and touched by her thoughtfulness. He wasn't used to people noticing such things, let alone acting on them. "Thank you," he said quietly, his fingers brushing over the herbs. "I'll make tea with them." I never thought of that." She gave a small nod, a glimmer of a smile playing at the corners of her lips. "You should. It'll help." Brass. And then, as if to cover her own discomfort with showing care, she turned away and added, "I should be going. Got more work to do." The farmer watched her leave, but as she walked away, he felt something stir in his chest. There was a warmth in him that hadn't been there before, something that told him maybe, just maybe, he wasn't as alone as he thought.
After that day, their interactions began to change. The visits weren't just about tasks and help anymore.
They began to share stories, even if they were small ones. The Apache woman whose name was Lila told him about her childhood growing up in the mountains, about her family and the way life had been before everything changed. She spoke with a quiet, almost mournful tone. But there was a strength in her words, a strength that came from surviving things no one should ever have to experience. She spoke about her tribe and the way they had been pushed out of their land, the battles they had fought, and the deep sense of loss that had shaped her into the woman she was now. The farmer listened intently, feeling a growing sense of respect for her. He hadn't known much about the Apache people or their history, but hearing it from Lila made him realize how little he understood about the world beyond his small patch of earth. He found himself wanting to know more, to understand her better, and she, too, began to share more of herself, little by little. One evening, as they sat together under the stars, Lila spoke about the long years of loneliness she had endured. "Ben! They don't understand," she said, her voice low. "They see me and they think I'm too strong, too big. They're afraid. I've spent months, years even, without anyone to talk to, anyone to share my thoughts with. They all think I'm just a giant, a force of nature. But I'm not." Her voice faltered, and she quickly turned her gaze to the ground, unwilling to let him see the vulnerability in her eyes. The farmer could hear the pain in her words. It was raw, unspoken pain that had built up over years of isolation. For the first time, he realized just how much he had been carrying alone. He wasn't sure what to say, but he felt a deep ache for her. He reached out, unsure, but gently touched her arm. It was the first time he had touched her, and it felt strange, but it also felt right.
"You're not just a giant," he said softly.
Breath. I can see that. Lila looked up at him then, her face softening. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice barely audible.
She didn't say more, but the words between them felt like a promise, an unspoken understanding that they would both stop pretending to be something they weren't. The following weeks brought more changes. The farmer found himself looking forward to her visits, to the conversations they would share, to the small moments where they could simply sit together and enjoy the quiet of the world.
Lila's presence began to fill a space in his heart he hadn't even known was empty.
He noticed the way his heart beat a little faster when he saw her walking toward his farm. The way his hands trembled slightly when they shook hands or exchanged words. But despite these feelings, he couldn't help but feel uncertain. He had always been a shy man, unable to express his emotions or even speak plainly to those he cared about. Lila was strong and independent, and the thought that she might not need him in the way he was beginning to need her left him feeling small and uncertain. And so, he hesitated. He hesitated in the same way he had always hesitated in life. Afraid to take a step forward, afraid of what might happen if he allowed himself to feel something deeper.
Lila, too, was careful with her emotions.
She had grown used to being alone, to carrying the weight of the world on her own shoulders. She had spent so many years pushing people away, guarding her heart like a fortress, that she wasn't sure how to open up to someone again. The farmer, with his quiet nature and his kindness, was the first person in a long time who made her feel like maybe, just maybe, she wasn't meant to walk through life alone. But the walls she had built were high, and she knew that if she let them down she would have to trust him. Trust him with her heart, her fears, her past. It was something she wasn't sure she could do. Despite these hesitations, there was a certain comfort in the space they shared. The silence between them, once awkward, had become a companion. They no longer needed to fill every moment with words. Sometimes, just sitting together was enough. They would enjoy a quiet meal or sit under the stars, both lost in their own thoughts, but still aware of the other's presence. There were days when the farmer caught himself thinking of Lila more often than not, wondering what it would be like to have her stay for longer, to share more than just fleeting moments. But he never said anything. He didn't want to push her. And Lila in turn often found herself wondering if he might ever say something, if he might ever take the first step. She had never expected to find someone like him, someone who seemed to understand her in a way no one ever had. But she wasn't sure if she was ready to let anyone in. And so, the days passed in this quiet dance of uncertainty and longing. Neither of them knew where it would lead, but they both knew that something had shifted between them. Neither of them were alone anymore, and that for the moment was enough. As the days passed, the quiet bond between the farmer and Lila began to take shape. It was a bond neither of them had expected, but it was real, and it was beginning to affect them in ways neither had fully understood. They still didn't speak of their feelings for each other, but there was something in the way they looked at one another now, something that wasn't there before. The farmer continued his daily work, tending to his crops, repairing fences, and fixing up his small home. But now there was an added rhythm to his days. He found himself looking forward to the moments when Lila would show up. Sometimes she came to him with a small task, needing help with a broken piece of equipment or offering him some herbs she had gathered. Other times she simply came to sit with him, and they would share a quiet meal or a drink. It was a routine, simple and unspoken, but it meant more to him than he could put into words. Lila, too, had begun to look forward to their time together. Though she didn't admit it to him, she started to realize that his presence was starting to fill a space inside her heart that she had long closed off.
She had always been fiercely independent, and she had convinced herself that she didn't need anyone.
But now the thought of her days without the farmer felt incomplete. He had a way of making her feel seen, making her feel like more than just a giant woman who kept to herself. With him, she didn't have to hide her true self. There was no need to pretend to be something she wasn't. Still, despite the growing connection, both of them remained cautious. The weight of the past hung over them, unspoken and ever-present. Lila had been hurt before, not just by the world around her, but by the men who had never truly seen her for who she was. She had learned to build walls around herself, walls that protected her heart. And while she was beginning to feel safe with the farmer, she was still afraid of letting those walls down completely. She wasn't sure if she could trust herself to open up, to allow herself to care for someone else again. For Farmer, his hesitation came from a place of shyness and self-doubt. He had always been a quiet, reserved man, and he had never known how to express his feelings. He was used to keeping his emotions bottled up, and the thought of opening up to Lila, of telling her how much she had come to mean to him, filled him with a sense of fear and uncertainty. He didn't know how to be vulnerable, how to let someone in. But the more time he spent with her, the more he realized that he didn't want to keep hiding his feelings. He didn't want to lose her, not when she had become such an important part of his life. It was a bright afternoon when things began to change. The sun hung high in the sky, casting a golden light over the fields as the farmer worked on mending a fence near the edge of his property. He had been working for hours, the steady rhythm of his hands a comfort, when he heard the sound of footsteps approaching. He turned to see Lila walking toward him, her long strides purposeful and sure. She was carrying something in her hands, though from this distance he couldn't tell what it was. She arrived at his side, offering him a small smile, though it was tinged with something else, something that caught his attention. Breath. It was almost like a silent question, something unspoken in her eyes.
I brought you something, Lila said, her voice steady but with a hint of vulnerability that she rarely showed.
She handed him a bundle wrapped in a cloth, and the farmer took it gently, unsure of what to expect. He unwrapped the cloth carefully, revealing a small collection of freshly baked bread.
It wasn't much, just a few loaves, but it was enough to make the farmer pause.
He wasn't used to receiving gifts, especially not something so thoughtful. The simple act of her giving him something she had made with her own hands touched him in a way that words couldn't describe. "Thank you," he said, his voice quiet but sincere. "This is
very kind of you."
Lila gave a small nod, her gaze lingering on him for a moment longer than usual.
Then she took a deep breath and spoke again, her tone softer this time. "I know I don't say it often, but I appreciate your company," she said, the words coming out more easily than she expected.
I don't have many people in my life, and I've gotten used to being alone.
But you make it easier. I didn't think I'd find someone who could understand what it's like to be by yourself all the time.
Breaths. The farmer was taken aback by her words. He had always sensed the loneliness in her, the quiet ache that she kept hidden behind her tough exterior. But hearing her say it out loud, hearing her admit that she felt the same way he did, it was like a weight was being lifted from his shoulders. He cleared his throat, unsure of what to say next. But then, something inside him pushed him to be honest.
He wasn't good with words, but he knew that this moment felt important.
He couldn't let it slip away without saying what was in his heart. I know what you mean," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I've spent most of my life alone, too. It's easy to get used to it, to convince yourself that it's enough. But being with you, it doesn't feel the same. I've never been this comfortable with someone before. You make me feel like maybe I'm not meant to be alone." Fred. Lila's eyes softened at his words. She hadn't expected him to open up like that, but somehow it made her feel a little less guarded. Breaking.
It made her feel like she wasn't the only one who had been carrying around this heavy burden of solitude.
For a moment they both stood there, the distance between them shrinking with every passing second. The farmer felt a warmth in his chest, a feeling that he had never allowed himself to fully embrace. He was standing in front of a woman who had her own battles to fight, who had her own scars, but she wasn't afraid to show him a glimpse of her heart.
And in that moment, he realized that he didn't want to let her go.
Lila, too, felt something shift inside her. She had spent so long keeping people at arm's length, telling herself that she didn't need anyone. But standing here with the farmer, feeling his sincerity, she began to wonder if maybe she had been wrong. Maybe she didn't have to do everything alone.
Maybe there was someone who could understand her, who could see beyond the tough exterior she had built over the years.
And for the first time in a long time, Lila allowed herself to believe that she might be ready for something more, ready to take the next step towards something real. Narration. She didn't know what the future would hold, but she knew that she didn't want to lose this connection with the farmer, not when it felt like they were both standing on the edge of something new. "I don't want to be alone either," she said softly, her voice steady but with an honesty that made the farmer's heart race. The words hung between them, fragile but meaningful. And in that moment, neither of them felt alone anymore. As the sun began to set, casting a soft pink light over the fields, the farmer and Lila sat down together on the ground. They didn't speak much after that, but the silence was different now. It wasn't uncomfortable or awkward. It was the kind of silence that only comes when two people have shared something real, something they couldn't quite put into words. And for the first time in a long time, both of them felt like maybe, just maybe, they had found what they had been looking for all along, a companion to share the journey with. The days that followed were filled with a quiet anticipation. The farmer and Lila had grown closer, and there was a sense of ease between them that neither had ever felt before. But despite the growing bond, there was still a part of both of them that hesitated to fully embrace the feelings that had begun to blossom. The pasts they carried, the loneliness they had each endured, were hard to forget. The farmer, shy and reserved, found it difficult to let his emotions flow freely. Lila, with her walls built high and strong, wasn't sure she could let anyone into her heart again. Still, there were moments, small and fleeting, where the connection between them felt undeniable. They would sit together on the porch, watching the sun dip below the horizon, and in those moments, words weren't necessary. It was as if their shared silence spoke volumes, a silent agreement that, for once, they didn't have to be alone. One afternoon, Lila arrived at the farmer's home earlier than usual. She was carrying a small bundle of wood, her arms strong as she approached. The farmer looked up from his work, wiping the sweat from his brow. "You're early," he said with a small smile, though he couldn't help but notice the slight change in the air. Something felt different today. Lila gave him a quiet nod, her eyes glancing down at the wood in her arms.
Needed to get out of the house. Thought you could use some firewood for the winter.
The farmer's heart warmed at her thoughtfulness. It wasn't just the firewood, though.
It was the way she took care of him in small, unnoticed ways. Her kindness wasn't loud, but it was there in everything she did.
"You didn't have to bring this over," he said, his voice soft but filled with gratitude. "I could have done it myself."
"I know," she replied with a hint of a smile.
"But I wanted to."
They stood there for a moment, a small but significant silence between them. It was the kind of pause that held so much meaning, a pause that wasn't uncomfortable but full of unspoken understanding. They had both been so used to doing things on their own, to not relying on anyone. But now, standing in each other's presence, the weight of their solitude seemed a little lighter. The farmer looked at her, his gaze soft but steady. "Lila," he began, unsure of how to continue. His words faltered, but there was something in his chest that he couldn't ignore. This wanted to say more, to express how much she had come to mean to him, but the words didn't come easily. Lila turned her head slightly, her brow furrowing as she noticed the hesitation in his eyes. "What's on your mind?" she asked, her voice quiet but filled with curiosity.
He hesitated for a moment, unsure of how to approach it.
I don't want to keep pretending that nothing's changed," he said slowly, his heart pounding in his chest. "You've been a part of my life in a way no one else has."
and I don't know what I'm supposed to say. But I need you to know that He trailed off, struggling to find the right words.
Lila watched him closely, her eyes soft but filled with something else.
She had been expecting this, had felt it coming for some time now. She, too, had felt the shift, the way her heart seemed to pull her toward him in ways she had never expected.
I know, she said softly. I've been feeling it, too.
And it scares me. The farmer looked up at her, surprised by her honesty. He had always known she was strong, but hearing her speak so openly about her own fears made him feel like maybe, just maybe, they could be vulnerable together.
I'm scared too, he admitted, his voice barely a whisper. I've never known how to open up.
I've always kept everything inside, never let anyone in. And now with you.
I don't know what to do with all of this. Lila took a step closer, her hand reaching out to gently touch his arm. Biz. It was a small gesture, but it spoke volumes. You don't have to have all the answers.
I don't either. But we're not alone anymore. We have each other.
The farmer's heart swelled at her words. He had never been one for grand declarations, but there was something about the way she said it, simple, honest, and without pretense, that made everything feel clearer. He wasn't alone anymore, but neither was she.
I don't know where this'll go, the farmer said, his voice steady now, but I know that I don't want to go back to being alone.
Not when I have you here. Lila smiled softly, the warmth in her eyes shining through.
Me neither, she said. I don't want to be alone anymore either. And with that, something shifted between them. The walls they had each built around their hearts, though still present, didn't feel as high anymore. They could see each other, truly see each other, and that was enough. For the first time in a long time, they were willing to take a step forward together, to face whatever came next, hand in hand. Days turned into weeks, and the connection between them deepened. They began to share more than just time. They shared their hopes, their dreams, and the parts of themselves that they had hidden for so long. Lila began to tell the farmer more about her past, about the pain she had carried with her, the losses she had endured. It wasn't easy for her to speak of it, but with him she found the courage to open up. The farmer, too, began to share his own past, the reasons he had kept to himself, the way he had always felt like an outsider. He didn't need to explain everything, but he wanted her to understand why he was the way he was, and in that understanding, they found common ground. They spent more time together, whether it was tending to the land, fixing the barn, or simply sitting side by side as the sun set over the horizon. It was a slow, gentle rhythm, but it felt right.
They didn't need to rush. The connection they had was growing in its own time, at its own pace, and that was enough.
But despite the comfort they found in each other, the world around them was not always as kind. The town, though it had begun to accept their bond, still whispered behind their backs. The farmer had never been one to care about what others thought, but he couldn't ignore the judgment that came with being seen with Lila. She was still an outsider in their eyes, someone who didn't belong. And though it hurt him to see her face the cold stares, he refused to back down.
Lila, too, felt the weight of the town's judgment.
Pshh. She had always been a woman apart, someone who didn't fit in, and though she had learned to ignore the harsh words of others, it still stung. But with the farmer beside her, she began to realize that their opinion didn't matter. What mattered was what they shared, what they were building together.
One evening, as they sat together on the porch, Lila turned to the farmer with a thoughtful look on her face.
Do you think we'll ever really fit in here? She asked quietly. The farmer looked out at the fields, the horizon stretching far before them. I don't know, but I don't need anyone else to understand us.
I understand you, and that's enough for me.
Breath. He glances around in desperate hell. Lila smiled, her heart swelling with warmth. That's enough for me, too, she said softly. Breath. And in that moment, the world outside their small farm seemed far away. They had everything they needed right there, in the space between them. Whatever the future held, they knew they would face it together. And for the first time in their lives, they didn't feel alone. As the seasons continued to shift, so did the bond between the farmer and Lila. What had started as a quiet friendship had blossomed into something deeper, something that neither of them had expected, but both had come to cherish. The farmer found himself looking forward to the mornings when he would wake up to find Lila already out by the fields, working as hard as he did, always ready with a smile or a quiet word of encouragement. Breaths. Lila, too, had started to look forward to his company, to the peaceful rhythm of their shared days. The days had grown warmer, and the land around them was thriving. Breath. The crops were strong, the animals healthy, and their home was slowly becoming a place that felt like more than just a shelter. It felt like a home filled with warmth, comfort. It wasn't perfect, and they still had their quiet moments of hesitation. But the unspoken understanding between them was clear. They were no longer alone. One morning, as the farmer worked in the fields, he noticed Lila standing by the fence, watching him with a far-off expression. She was holding something in her hands, but her mind seemed elsewhere. Bray. He paused his work and made his way over to her, his boots crunching on the dry grass.
Is everything all right? He asked, his voice filled with concern.
Lila had been quieter lately, lost in her thoughts more often than usual. Lila glanced up, her expression softening when she saw him.
Breath.
I'm fine, she said, though her voice lacked the usual strength. She paused, looking down at the object she was holding, a small piece of wood, carved with delicate patterns.
Breath speak. I've just been thinking a lot about everything. About us. About what we built here. The farmer stood beside her, his gaze following hers as he took in the piece of wood. He could tell it meant something to her, though she hadn't yet explained why. What are you thinking? He asked gently. I'm thinking that I've never known anything like this before, she said, her voice low. I've spent so many years alone, convinced that I didn't need anyone. But then I found you, and I found something I didn't even know I was looking for, but she glanced at him, her eyes filled with sincerity. And now I wonder, what does it all mean? What are we doing here? The farmer felt his heart swell at her words. He had known from the beginning that she had been carrying her past with her, and even though they had come so far, there were still moments when the weight of it all seemed too much for her. But standing there beside her, he realized that the answer wasn't something they could define with certainty. The answer was something they would find together in the quiet moments and in the simple everyday acts of care and kindness they had shown each other. I think, he said softly, we're building something together, something real. I can't tell you what the future will look like, but I know this much. I don't want to be anywhere else. I don't want to be alone, not when I have you. Lila's eyes softened, and she nodded, her lips curving into a small smile. I feel the same way, she whispered. But I've always been so afraid of depending on someone. I've always thought that if I let myself get too close, I'd lose it all. But now, with you, I don't feel so afraid. The farmer reached out and took her hand in his, the simple gesture more meaningful than any words could express. You don't have to be afraid anymore, he said, his voice steady. We're in this together. Whatever comes, we'll face it as a team. Right. For a moment, they stood there in silence, their hands clasped together, a quiet promise passing between them. The world around them seemed to fade away, and in that moment all that mattered was the connection they shared. They didn't need to know what the future held, because they had each other. And for the first time in a long time, both of them felt like they were exactly where they were meant to be. In the weeks that followed, life continued to settle into a comfortable rhythm. The seasons turned, bringing new challenges, but also new opportunities. The farmer and Lila worked side by side, building their lives together day by day. The crops flourished, the animals thrived, and their home became a place where laughter and love were woven into the very fabric of their lives. They shared meals together, worked together, and found joy in the small, everyday moments they had once taken for granted. But even as they grew closer, the outside world was still present, and it wasn't always as kind as their shared moments. The townspeople, though they had grown accustomed to seeing the farmer and Lila together, still looked at them with suspicion. Some of the men, especially those who felt threatened by Lila's strength and independence, made their judgment clear in the way they spoke about her when she wasn't around. They still whispered about her past, about her differences, and about the farmer's quiet nature. At first it bothered the farmer. He wasn't used to being the subject of gossip, and he hated that Lila had to endure it. But over time he realized that the opinions of others didn't matter. What mattered was the life they were building together. He had always known that people would talk, but now, with Lila by his side, he didn't care. He didn't need their approval. All that mattered was the quiet understanding they had found in each other. One evening as the sun set behind the hills, the farmer and Lila sat together on the porch, their backs against the cool wooden boards of the house. The sky was painted with soft shades of pink and purple, and the air was still, save for the faint rustling of the wind in the trees. Lila leaned her head against the farmer's shoulder, a contented sigh escaping her lips. "I never thought I'd find peace," she said quietly, her voice almost a whisper. "But here, with you, it feels like I've found a place where I belong." The farmer smiled, his arm wrapping around her shoulders in a gentle embrace. "You've always belonged," he said softly. "You just needed someone to see it." They sat there in the fading light, a sense of peace settling over them. For the first time in their lives, neither of them felt the weight of their pasts. Together, they had found something more than just companionship. They had found a home. A place where they didn't have to hide who they were. A place where they could simply be themselves. And as the stars began to twinkle in the sky above them, the farmer realized that their journey had only just begun. There would be challenges ahead, moments of doubt, and times when the road would feel uncertain. But as long as they had each other, he knew they could face anything that came their way.
Do you think we'll always be like this? Lila asked, her voice filled with a quiet wonder.
The farmer turned to her, his heart full. "I don't know what the future holds," he said, "but I do know this. As long as we're together, we'll be just fine." And as the night fell, they sat together. The world around them quiet and still. They had found their place, and it was enough. They were no longer alone.